کاوش مدیا.
If not by force, what are the other means at the U.S. disposal to put pressure on Iran?
Well, we see the U.S. right now, as I was saying, reaching out to the UAE and to Israel, trying to again signal that the U.S. is still involved in the region, is still trying to throw its weight around in a way that it's sort of accustomed to doing. But I really don't think there's much more to be done. As my colleague was saying, the maximum pressure has already maximized, and Iran has actually reduced its dependence on oil, is reaching out to China. And increasingly, we see not only Iran, but other countries finding ways to get around U.S. sanctions, to get off the U.S. dollar. So the more the U.S. tries to act in ways that signal that it is still sort of the unipolar, most powerful actor in the global order, simply undermines American power because it pushes other countries to move away from the sort of American-led system, which again is so contrary to what the U.S. had originally said it wanted, which is to bring other countries in, to try to encourage diplomacy. I mean, in general, it's really just demonstrating some of the hypocrisy that lies underneath a lot of American policy, which claims to want to push for peace and global integration, but instead is really just a sort of dressed up version of trying to maintain American primacy.
And now, let me ask you this as well. I mean, is this not ruling out force line? Is it perhaps a subtle way to kind of green light more Israeli covert action in Iran, be it via assassinations or targeted attacks?
Yes, I think so. I think the concern right now for the UAE, they're probably feeling a bit worried that they've signed these Abraham Accords, which theoretically Israel might be trying to push for, perhaps trying to launch something from the UAE, being that much closer to Iran. And the UAE doesn't want to be caught in the middle here. I think they entered the Abraham Accords because the Trump administration demonstrated that they were going to get F-35s out of the deal. This was a nice way for them to signal their utility as a key security partner of the United States. But they may be realizing now what they've gotten themselves into, which is involvement in this deeply anti-Iran coalition. And if things do start to get violent, the UAE will be caught in the middle.
Mohammed, I want to come back to you about that, because should Iran at all be worried that, you know, the United States is, as I said, subtly giving Israel the green light to carry out more covert action that is highly destabilizing to Iran, the targeted attacks and the assassinations?
Well, I think that if anyone looks at the map, they'll see that the Israelis don't really have much of an advantage. Much of Israeli trade goes eastwards and passes by Iran, whereas most of Iranian trade goes eastward as well, and very little passes by Israel. So Israeli ships could easily be targeted. And Iran's missile and drone defense capabilities, as I said, are very extensive. And Iran's allies surround the Israeli regime. So I don't think it's really in the interest of the regime to be provocative towards Iran. Iran has shown recently that it's going to respond aggressively against any Israeli provocation. We've seen cases of that. So no, I don't think Iran takes that seriously. In fact, what the Israelis do is they give the Iranians an opportunity, a legitimate opportunity, to punish them. And also, I think an important point that we have to keep in mind is that the Israelis, when they establish very good ties with regimes in this region, whether it's the UAE or whether it's Azerbaijan or anyone, in the long term, it actually delegitimizes those states, those governments, those regimes, because nowhere in this region do people like the Israelis. They see them as colonizers. They see it as an apartheid regime. They see them murdering Palestinians on a daily basis. So while the Israelis may think that they've gained a foothold in country A, B, or C, in reality, they're only, in the long term, delegitimizing, in the eyes of the public, their allies.
آنچه در مورد ما میگویند